you want to know how your child is going to turn out and how they're going to behave, you just look at yourself. In this Tolstoy short story, there's a little boy named Misha who has parents who are often fighting in front of him or often disagreeing in front of him. And they basically treat the old grandmother in the house very, very poorly. They grumble about her being, extremely annoying and slow and breaking things. One day they see little Misha, who's now, like a really young kid, and he's playing with some blocks. And they say, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a dish pan so that when you and mother are the age of grandma, you'll be able to eat out of the same dish pan you force her to eat out of." And it's sort of like this, amazing kind of insight,
Welcome back to the Jews Next Door podcast, where each month we explore a different topic of our parenting hierarchy with the goal of raising the next generation of passionate and committed Jews. I'm your host, Rabbi Irman Shel, and for this month, we're going to be resuming our focus on building healthy children with the topic of emotional health. In order for us to be able to build healthy children, we as parents must help our children to be able to navigate the ups and downs of life. As parents, we must role model mental strength and show children how to face fears, how to teach them how to emotionally regulate themselves, and so much more, how to socialize, all these different things. Learn how to do this in this month, where we will kick it off with our first episode, with the basics episode with Dr. David Pelcovitz, who is one of the most known psychologists in the Jewish world, who talks about how parents can take care of their own emotional health and what it means to raise an emotional health, and obviously much more. In the practical episode, we're going to speak to the founder of Skills for Connection and the author of Bubble Double, Miriam Campbell, who tells us about the tools that parents can use in order to help them self-regulate and help them to be able to navigate social situations and so much more. In the intervention episode, we speak about the internal family systems with Shira Fruchter, who is a therapist who specializes in IFS, and how we can use IFS, internal family systems, to help children who are struggling with their emotional health. And finally, for the last episode, a special topic within this topic of emotional health, we discuss how parents can give their children the childhood that they didn't have through what's called post-traumatic parenting with Dr. Robin Kozlowitz. Without further ado, enjoy the episode and enjoy the month, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's pleasure and an honor to be here. It's great.
Thank you. So let's dive right back. Let's dive right in. How can parents take care of their emotional health before we even get into parenting their children to emotional health? But how can parents take care of their own emotional health as they transition to becoming a parent, either for the first time or as they have more children?
Yeah, I'm always struck by the finding that detailed knowledge of each other's life is a crucial buffer when husband and wife, a new father or mother, have that against the stress of parenting. Actually, very early in my career, I was asked to give a series of parenting talks to women who were expecting their first child. And to me, it didn't make any sense at the time. I was thinking like, wow, it's all going to be theoretical. Why not wait till they have the kid already? How could we do? And it turned out I was so wrong. They really connected in this very intense way. And it's always humbling to be proven wrong. But the studies, as I understand them, just in terms of my direct experience, no greater preparation than to get to know one another at an even deeper level as you have your children.
Okay. And that applies both for the first and for when it's, second or whatever it is.
Yeah, look, I'm sure it changes with time. We get more and more relaxed and more confident with time. I think the lesson that people often learn is that our children aren't, made out of china, fine china, and there's a lot of leeway for messing up, but there's always the concept of good enough parenting.
What do you mean by that? So good enough parenting is this that
nobody expects you to be perfect. Good enough means that you're there, that you love, and that what's front and center in your mind is to want to give your child your full attention, but there's plenty of room for messing up.
Parenting can sometimes bring up, unpleasant feelings for us, like when, let's say, a child is not listening, or we feel unheard, or especially if, let's say, as a child we felt that we were unheard. So how can we address those wounds when a child's doing that to us and it brings up all those feelings? How, before we even get to, parents addressing the emotional health of their child, but sometimes, first things first, the parent needs to, like you said, you need to, first things first, the couple needs to get closer. So what about within their own, personal ones?
Yeah. So, as concrete as this is going to sound, it's, the key is, the step back response, being able to just take a breath, normal breath in, a slow breath out, and to not necessarily respond right away. Strike when the iron is cold, not when the iron is hot. Right. When we do that, it just buying that time makes all the difference. There's a brilliant insight in the Sefer HaChasidim, going back to the Middle Ages. Yeah. 3 words: Achris Katata Harata. After argument, there's regret. Right. And to just work on that and work on the step back response and work on not giving in to one's immediate frustrations, makes such a difference. I see that even very young kids, even infants, you could see how they respond to parents who are fighting with each other all the time.
Right. What would you say is the best way for a parent to practice that? Besides for obviously just doing it and stepping back, but is there, a specific way to work on that?
Well, yeah, probably the most helpful way to work on it is to figure out a way to, make time to talk, make time to sit down and deconstruct some of the triggers that, seem to lead to disagreement. That's normal. It's, there's nothing quite as complex as the complexity of parenting different children, each of whom may have a totally different temperament, and what works perfectly for one kid is exactly the wrong thing to do with another kid. And we just have to be kind to ourselves and to each other.
But what would you say is the reason that it's important for a parent to take care of the emotional health of a child, of their child?
It's the foundation, It's amazing to me how when I see, people in my practice, or just in general, in my life, who have had a foundation that is not solid and not, predictably loving and really being there in the best way that you can for your kids. It pervades a child's life all the way through. Doesn't mean it can't be, fixed.
Why is that?
Because it's the building blocks, it's the building blocks. We see others in a way that is very much a reflection on what our reality has been growing up, and we tend to bring that into our day-to-day living.
Sure. So what does that mean to be an emotionally healthy child? What exactly, what's the definition of that?
The simple definition would be a child who, we would always tell our graduate students, work, love, and play. Meaning that work, in the case of a little kid, is a kid who's able to do the basics that are asked of him or her on a regular basis in school or socially, and in terms of being able to maintain friends. And also the ability to enjoy oneself, the ability to just do what kids do best, which is to just have fun. You know, that's a key building block.
Right. So a part of this is giving a child the social skills that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so is that a job of the parents? Is that a job of in school? How does that?
I would say it all starts with the parents. It has to be the social skills. It has to be the emotional regulation abilities, the ability to self-soothe.
So how do parents help a child to, both those, social skills and emotional regulation? If a parent has the ability themselves to emotionally regulate, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll know how to give that over to a child. So how would you advise?
Well, but again, it's all about modeling. Our kids are extremely prone to model what they see, sometimes even unconsciously.
Right.
There's this great Tolstoy short story that may be worth saying. Right. Okay. But listen to this short story. But basically, the idea is, you want to know how your child is going to turn out and is how they're going to behave. You just look at yourself. In this Tolstoy short story, there's a little boy named Misha, mm-hmm. who is has parents who are often fighting in front of him, or often disagreeing in front of him, right. And they basically treat the old grandmother in the house very, very poorly. Yeah. They grumble about her being, extremely annoying and slow and breaking things. One day they see little Misha, who's now, like really young kid, and he's playing with some blocks. And they say, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a dishpan, so that when you and mother are the age of grandma, you'll be able to eat out of the same dishpan you forced her to eat out of." It's sort of like this, amazing kind of insight. It's a well-known Russian folktale that has amazing wisdom in it.
So in terms of emotional regulation, it's the modeling. What about social skills? Meaning, like, sometimes even in terms of modeling, our child just needs the ability to, facilitate conversation and when to input themselves, how close to get to people, proximity wise. There's all those things that they don't necessarily. And some of them pick it up naturally, some don't. So what's the ability of a parent to give it over to a child?
Yeah, I think people get social skills, largely from school, of course, from what they see. But it's also, when you see your parents interrupting each other, or you see your parents in some ways being just poor role models about, how to have turn-taking conversations and how to be respectful of the perspective of others. That's going to be very much the building blocks here.
But other than modeling, are there other components that help to a parent to raise an emotionally healthy child?
So it's a combination, not just of modeling, but also how you handle anger, how you handle frustration, and your ability to believe in your kid. There's a beautiful Rabbeinu Tzadok of Lublin. He says, "Kashem shetzarach adam laha'amin b'Hashem yisbarach." Just like we have to teach our children to believe in God. Kach tzarach acher kach laha'amin ba'atzmo. So too do we need to teach them to believe in themselves. Ratzalomar sheyesh lakadosh baruch hu esak imo. God cares about us. Sheinenu poel batel. Shebein laila haya uvein laila avad. We're not an insignificant being, here one day and gone the next. So that's the that's the core.
Yeah. So how does a parent get a child to believe in themselves, have self-confidence?
I think by us believing in them, okay, what's the first tefillah that we teach our kids? Moda ani lefanecha. So same Rabbeinu Tzadok says, you know what Moda ani lefanecha is really all about? Rabba emunasecha, that's the end of that tefillah, as much as your belief in us. You believe in us. And that's the key.
In terms of a parent believing in the child. So sometimes, a child, if the child, let's say, does have struggles, how does a parent overcome seeing the child as the struggles to be able to have that belief still? That way, the child can believe in themselves and not lose the faith in themselves.
Right. So the key is, and it's not easy at all, is because there's sometimes that our kids are extremely annoying and extremely trying and have really tough kind of temperaments. But if in spite of that, we're able to still be patient and to be with them in a calm kind of way and to reflect back that we really believe in them. There's the well-known Pygmalion study where they find that they have a group of children who are put into a fourth grade class, okay? And they're randomly assigned to two groups. One group, the kids are the teacher of the fourth graders is told you really lucked out. You have the gifted class this year. You have these unbelievable kids. Another group in this well-known study, they're told, the kids are just average. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe in a kid, they often will rise to meet your expectations, both positive and negative. Story I often talk about, or example I often talk about, is Clever Hans, which I think is an amazingly powerful example. There was a horse in Germany in the late 1800s that was a genius in math. You could ask this horse any math problem whatsoever. He asks the question, it'll tap out the answer. The answer is 415. It'll tap out 415 and stop. If the answer is 5, tap out 5 and stop. Clever Hans never got it wrong. And people heard about this genius horse in math and came to visit the farm in a way that the farmer couldn't even do his farming. Right. His farm was ridden with people coming to see this genius horse. And they have a psychologist at the time who they say, please help us figure out what's going on here, because, we know that this has nothing to do with our understanding of human intelligence versus animal intelligence. Animals shouldn't be able to do it. And the psychologist figured it out in a very basic way. He took a screen and he put it between him and the genius horse. And once the horse couldn't see him, the horse got no questions right. Because what was Hans a genius at? At reading nonverbal cues. Yeah. So the nonverbal cues will, if the answer was 25, at 25, the pupils of the questioner would widen a little bit. His or her breathing pattern would shift subtly. Skin color would shift. And kids are really good at picking up on those subtleties.
Wow. So, and back to parents in terms of, when you have like those trying children. So how should a parent overcome, be able to really like see past that to still retain that faith?
Yeah. So it's I put it on different channels. On the cognitive channels, how do you speak to yourself? What do you say to yourself to say, look, this is just what a 5-year-old kid does for a living. Okay. And you just, you tell yourself this is totally normal and that's fine. On the behavioral channel, we try our hardest not to lose it, not to go to some kind of yelling and screaming or criticism, high levels of expressed emotion. okay, where parents yell, scream, and criticize are always poison for kids.
In what ways would you say that the emotional health of a child affects their religious development? Yeah, I know we said it's the foundation, but in what ways does it come out in terms of that? Yeah.
So they are very much so. The Bein Adam L'Chaveiro is inextricably intertwined with the Bein Adam L'Makom. The two are totally integrated and mixed together.
Why is that?
Because the Bein Adam L'Chaveiro is basically, if you're feeling good about yourself and your social interactions and your parents and your friends and your community and your school, okay, you're also that same connection is also going to be Bein Adam L'Makom. Okay, so they're very much tied together. Yeah.
And in terms of, as a child is developing, as they go through these different stages of development. So in what ways does a child's, emotional health, I guess, change? Obviously as a child or as a teen enters into, puberty and a lot of different things are going on within puberty, they go through their turbulent times. So what other changes are there for parents to be aware of as they go through the different developmental stages?
Yeah. So, so adolescence is the time that it's always helpful to tell ourselves that, it's a stage of temporary insanity. Not only are hormones, going awry, there's everything is felt more intensely in adolescence. Sure. We sort of forget. You look at all the coming of age movies, are often about teens and their coming of age. And I think that's there's a reason why we remember that time of our life so intensely. It's because hormonal. Yeah. It's also the part of our brain that's involved in impulse control goes offline for a little while.
Specifically at adolescence, you're saying?
At adolescence. Yeah, in adolescence, there's a rewiring of our neural architecture in a way that is pretty dysregulating. It's just what they do. And if parents can see that, it's not necessarily a sign of, oh my God, this kid's a disaster, and recognize that, they'll grow out of it, as long as you give them, everything we've been talking about, the love and the belief in them and not getting pulled in too much in, unnecessary kind of power struggles. The average kid will turn out okay.
As long as we, keep that level-headed approach with that.
Yeah, which is hard, but it's also doable. It's totally doable.
I once heard a great line that we often think that when we look at adolescents as teens, at their finished product, but it's a continuous film. They keep going, and they're not even close to that. We have to think of it that way. We have to change our perspective on it.
When I ask audiences who I'm giving a talk to on adolescence, how many of you did things when you were teenagers that your parents never even knew about? And you always have this guilty smile on everybody's face. And our parents often, don't know, but we have to just remember what it was like for us. It's very helpful to do some time travel,
Right. And in terms of, the developmental stages, are there any things that happen, let's say with a toddler or a young child, that affects their emotional health, let's say in a more permanent way? Are there things that do that?
Yeah. So trauma, trauma, it could be, being in a terrible accident or in a fire or, traumatic loss. It turns out that preschoolers are particularly affected by trauma. So I was involved at some point in my career at doing the DSM post-traumatic stress disorder field trials. One of the questions that the team asked was, when's the worst time in life to be traumatized? And it turned out that it was, much to our surprise, it was during the preschool years, because they get it wrong and they blame themselves, and they have magical thinking, and they just don't get it. And parents don't necessarily realize it. And other times adolescents, because during adolescence, we need to feel totally invulnerable.
I had a lot of friends who told me that post-COVID, their children who were in daycare, they, since they were in the house for COVID, and they got so traumatized from that they like couldn't go anywhere. Like their daycare child, just whenever they would want to go, let's say even just somewhere fun, like a Chuck E. Cheese or whatever, their child like would freeze up. Like, we don't go out of the house. We don't do that. And it was like they really got traumatized by that. It's great.
Yeah. And which is really, really surprising. And when you look at some of the empirical research on, what COVID did to child development, much more severe and longer lasting. But I also am a big believer in resilience. Kids are bouncing back. Right. And especially in our community where kids are surrounded with a lot of our gifted educators and, et cetera. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that it took such an effect, because I assumed, children are going to bounce back, but it took took some time. But I mean, I think, for the most part, I think it seems like most of the children are more or less, bouncing back, but it's interesting. And in terms of gender, how does gender play a role on a child's emotional health? Meaning the differences between boys and girls?
Yeah. So, for example, trauma is a good example. When traumatic events happen, girls are more directly impacted than boys. Not saying that boys all do well, but girls are particularly impacted.
Why is that?
There's something about that kind of gender difference in terms of wiring, in terms of, maybe it's we should be looking at social media, and what social media does has a particular impact on girls. But in general, depression and anxiety are more common in girls.
And you just mentioned social media. How does social media play a role? And I mean, I know, there's these studies that came out in terms of like Instagram, about how it's so targeted, especially at girls, to get them to think a certain way about themselves. How can a parent in this social media ridden world that we're in manage a child's emotional health?
Yeah, I think it's essential to regularly sit down with your kid and talk to them about it. We have to respect their privacy, but we also have to have it understood by them that they're not necessarily in an age where you can allow them with such an incredibly powerful cultural and psychological shaping force without you're keeping an eye on them. And then with time, they could earn your trust in these areas.
What did that conversation look like?
Basically, to just sit with your kid and say, "Look, I need to know your password. I need you to know that I'm going to talk to you about what's going on with you. Especially if there's something that's really particularly upsetting to you. I want to know about it. There isn't anything you could come to me with that will lead in any way to a loss of my love for you or whatever. But you just need to know that I'm here to protect you and be there for you."
Right. And in terms of, when a child, let's say, is going through a rough patch and an emotion, in terms of their emotional health, how can a parent, best support them through that time? Or, I'm sure from your vast experience, different people coming to you or dealing when there is a trauma in a school or different things. What's the course of action in terms of that?
Yeah. So number one is presence, is to really be there. I often quote something I learned from Moshe Tzvi Weinberg here at YU, that he quoted the Piaseczner, who quoted the Baal Shem Tov, who said that when we say in Shema a number of times every day, V'yavadatem mehera, one of the ways of thinking about that is get rid of the rush in your life. Okay, just be present. You have to be present. You have to remind yourself to focus. And it's hard to do that because we're living in a world where we're constantly being fragmented. The other 4-word tefillah that goes back over the millennia is Hashem yatzileni mipizer hanefesh. Rabbeinu Bachya said, God save me from the fragmentation of my soul that comes from me constantly checking on our devices. But, back then it was about pressure at work, pressure with, even then, people, were managing their businesses. Yeah. But boy, is that on steroids today. Yeah.
So first things first is presence. After that?
It's presence. It's the ability to really spend time, undiluted time with your kid, so that they know when you're there, they know when you're not there. They're one of the most famous experiments in recent years is called the still face experiment. It's been replicated all over many times by Dr. Tronick at Harvard. And what he does is he shows a mother and a 6-month-old infant interacting, and the mother is really there and is warm and, doing her thing, and the baby is being responsive. Then for 2 minutes, only 2 minutes, she presents a still face. The mother presents a still face to her infant. Right. She doesn't respond at all. Yeah. So the baby calls to her, goes, the way babies that age call. The baby smiles. The baby tries to do everything he or she possibly can to get the parent's attention. And after a while, the saddest thing is the baby, first of all, starts crying hysterically and then ultimately gives up, which is one of the saddest things.
Learned helplessness?
It's tied to learned helplessness, but also just tied to how we have to remember that that's what's shaping our kid's soul, Wow.
Right. And, when you've been brought in, let's say, to a school in the past or to an institution to talk about, what's the first thing that you would like to let's say, to talk about a trauma that happened, if there was a death in a school or, some major tragedy, what's the best way that you would talk to a child where parents can try to mimic what you've done?
Yeah. So, we have materials, and actually the OU has some amazing materials. High Lifeline and OHEL have, amazing materials. And, it's basically the main point that's usually given is, you have to, be present for the child. B, you have to set things up so that you tolerate the child's regression, including maybe even needing to sleep with you, even in adolescence, for a bit of time. Wow. And you tolerate all kinds of regression because that's what kids do when this happens. And then you gradually negotiate with them on how to get back to normal. The main point we also make has a lot to do with proximity. So if you think about a pebble being thrown into a pond of water, there's concentric circles around the point of impact. Right. The point of impact that's closest to the pebble are the people we have to spend the most time paying attention to. So those are the kids that need help. They may very well need to be evaluated. They may need to be possibly working with the school psychologists and community experts. And we're blessed with amazing experts out there. But the good news is that resilience is the norm. If we could give kids the stability of knowing that we're there for them and normalizing their response, that makes all the difference in the world.
One of the things, like you were just saying, like making sure that our children know that we're there for them. How can parents, which I feel like is very tied to this concept of emotional health, how can they create this atmosphere where children feel not just that they're there for them, but feel I really can come and talk to you about anything? How can parents realistically set up that type of environment?
Well, I think first of all, it's just to say it, to just tell them that there's nothing that you're going through now that you can come to me with that will lead to my in any way losing the relationship that we have. I'll be so proud of you that you've come to me, but I'll also, and to model for them the fact that even if they do something that you totally disapprove of, that you're going to do whatever it takes to protect them, and at the same time, whatever it takes to be there for them at their side.
As we ramp up, are there any things that within this topic of you're raising a child with emotional health that parents wouldn't think to ask about?
Yeah, I think parents often underestimate the toll it takes on a child when we disagree a lot, or when we're, fighting. They often feel that kids don't even see it or they don't hear it, and that's pretty common. Right. And we just have to constantly remind ourselves, of course, we're going to lose this sometimes. We also have to remember that kids are always watching. That's one point. The other is we don't have to treat our kids equally. Kutzker said there's nothing as unequal as the equal treatment of a child. Each child we have to raise and be there for them in a way that really recognizes that each one is, many have said, has their own unique tune, their own unique neshama, and that's part of the beauty of our kids. When we bench our children on Friday night, for those of us who have that beautiful minhag, you'll notice that you relate to them in a completely different way based on our own unique relationship with them. I heard this from Rabbi Brafman, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, at a conference for kids who had left our way of life. And he noticed, and after that I saw it, when I give a bracha, even though they're adults now, to my oldest son, his sense of humor comes out. And when I bench my oldest daughter, her chen comes out. And then the next kid is kind of cuddly. And the next kid is, we have, we have other things that capture the uniqueness of who they are. And that's, I think, one of the best protections for our children.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much. This was really so insightful. So much wisdom here, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you for the wonderful work you're doing. It's great. Okay.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Jews Next Door. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I'd love to hear your takeaways. Reach out to us. Reach out to me at yair@jenaleph.org, hi@jenaleph.org. You can check us out on the website. You could leave a question there. We'd love to be in touch. Please be in touch. Check us out on Instagram at Parenting the Jews Next Door. Hit me up on Twitter at Yair Menshel. And we're on TikTok now too. We have some great content, a lot of really great insights into parenting, tips, parenting pointers, reaction videos, and quotes. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of articles. You want to check it out. Check it out at jenaleph.org. You won't be sorry you did. And I look forward to hearing from you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe and share it with your family and friends. Looking forward to another great episode next week.